Welcome to the Beyond Body podcast with your hosts, Mia and Holly. Join us for a sometimes fortnightly podcast
where we explore all things mental health, being a messy human, and how to get the most out of this one precious life.
And all the ridiculous stories in between.
Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode. As always, we are thrilled to be here chatting and hopefully supporting you on your way to living a beautiful, messy, recovered life. Mil?
Fantastic. Sounds good to me.
Intro. That was the best intro we've ever done. The episode can only go down from here.
Crossing everything.
Well, Mil, my dear, what has been a highlight, low light from your last weeks since we last chat?
Look.
Oh, I regretted that question as soon as I said
it. Let's just say politically things have felt a bit low for me recently. We'll keep it that general. But I'd say a highlight in response to that has been just the privilege of all of these amazing communities that I seem to be surrounded with that are filled with just like the most amazing, smart, funny, powerful, like resilient women.
Totally.
Just my reminder that I just think women are bloody amazing, you know. They're just
amazing. God, we're
amazing.
We are the best thing that ever happened to this world.
even if a lot of people don't agree with that, evidently. But yeah, it was like listening to Paris Paloma on the way back from Mollymook today and was just feeling like had a couple of days in the low, in the low feelings. And then eventually with me, like there's always the engine that starts revving after that and ideas coming to mind and things to do and gaps to fill. Just what you need at the end of the year.
That is how your mind works. I do know that about you. You're like, okay, now this is hard. What are we going to do with this? Very much creator mindset.
Yeah, sad, then furious, and then let's get some strategies to get ourselves out of it. Same back to you, low light, highlight.
Highlight, low light. I mean, political, obviously, like the world has been quite testing. But I think I had some great highlights last week. Last week I was in Sydney and Melbourne and also Albury. I was all over the shop. But some Sydney highlights. I had lunch with a couple of long-term clients, which was like so nice. It was so gorgeous. So that was a massive highlight. Also like snuck a birthday in there, not in the last week, but like quite recently. So that was like also it was fine. It was a fine birthday. It was just like a neutral birthday, I would say.
Yeah.
29 is just such a like, I don't know, age. I was like, I don't think I want to celebrate it.
But my immediate response to that is you have your 30s ahead of you. 30s are bloody fantastic. They are like turning 30 was one of my favorite years. Like it's just a different relationship with yourself more than anything. Like I don't think your life really changes.
Established.
Exactly. Like your sense of self and just I think how you move in the world changes, and that's not everyone's experience, but a lot of the women who I was turning 30 with, we all seem to be sharing a lot of this. We'll either go off the deep end in terms of like maybe a little bit of panic, and then you see this other group of women who are just like, this feels great. Like I just feel like I'm settling into myself more.
It's like a different feeling. Yeah, I remember I was saying like when it was my birthday, my sister was like, wait, you're still in your 20s? I was like, I know, I feel like I've been in this decade for such a long time. I feel like I'm ready for 30s. I'm excited for it, but it's also, I don't know, it's a bit of a like tricky transition.
It is because it's sort of like there's the external expectations of you and then your internal expectation. But this is the thing that I love is that, and so much of what I think that we can do and what I aim to do, especially with my social media, is to show women all these different incarnations of the lives that they can live and to go, let's take all the boxes and the walls away and then just put all the options on the table. And then you just pick up what you want, like get out of the rigid tracks and look at your values, your goals, like where you see your life going, and then make all your choices accordingly and do it unapologetically.
Absolutely. And because we have the retreat coming up, one of the many retreats we're now doing coming up next week. So I've been like going over all like the amazing workshops that we put on. And like so much of that work, it's like it's embodiment and values and it's all these like very core things that it makes me feel like, God, I'm so grateful I recovered from an eating disorder in my 20s. I am so stoked I did that.
Yeah. And especially like getting everyone on the call, which we do before every retreat. We got our group together. Yes. And that for me, I got off that. I was like, I always look forward to these, but they're just so magical in all their different ways because of who's attending and like all the things they're coming to not just sort of get out of it, but everyone ends up offering something pretty beautiful and special themselves. And you could just see that group and you're just like, I
It's gonna
can,
be great.
it's going to be unreal.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
Yeah.
But to our episode today, we are for the third podcast in a row. Is that true? It's true. We're
Yes.
talking about body image, but this time we're just going to be going over some questions that the people have sent in to us about body image because, it's such a collective experience, but it also is a really independent experience.
Mm.
And I think a lot of it is just also kind of really tricky to talk about, particularly if you're unaware of, you never really know how someone else is feeling about how they're presenting in the world, right? Like body image is one of those things like it's really easy to mask. Sometimes it's really hard to mask, right?
Yes.
So I think this is why it's cool to get everyone's questions so we can really give our own opinions on things and sort of what we think. Because often also like you and I will have different opinions on some of these things, which I think is also super useful.
Completely, because I think that your body image is obviously so personal. And so then when you're
Yeah.
working from a lived experience framework, of course, we have things that make our training expansive and different skills we use and tools we use. And I don't go, well, this was my cookie cutter body image experience, so this is what I teach to everyone else. I have so much that I learn from my clients and in workshops, like the body neutrality workshops that I've done for years, where I've sort of added layers to it along the way that aren't centered around my lived experience. But I think it's a base understanding that like we all don't have the same eating disorders. We don't all have the same disordered eating experience, but we do have this shared unspoken language with each other. And then
Totally.
once you start to get into the nuance, it starts to get really, really interesting.
Yeah, so interesting.
Yeah. So our first question is a really practical one, which I love the practical side of body image stuff, is do you have tips for stopping body checking and weighing yourself?
I feel like this question is so your arena. I feel like you were the queen of like taking the image and being like, you know what? We can make it practical.
Yes.
I feel like up until I met you, I was like, this isn't practical. I don't know what to do. Like
Yeah.
I'm just gonna like feel shit. So I feel like some of the core things that you told me in my recovery are very much like things that I share with clients all the time. So I feel like gonna let you take the stage on this one.
Totally. Totally. So the reason I'm so passionate about this is because I know that I was not only told, but many people are told there are no like skills for body image that we can really teach until people get to the end of the process, which A is not true. And B, I think is where people are let down so much because body image is one of the biggest walls that people hit. And then they go flying backwards and they regress and they don't have to. We just have to hand them the appropriate ladder at the appropriate time. So body checking, we got into it a little bit in the last episode, why it's so damaging, etc. But some of the things that I get people to do are just like we said, completely practical, covering mirrors, making a really conscious effort when you are like paying attention first and foremost to your body checking points. I get people to do a body checking log just one day a week where they take note of all the times that they interact with their body in a way that they know is a body check. It's not just incidentally interacting with their body.
Yeah.
And then we can see from that body check, like what are the main words being used on that log? Is it mirror? Is it looking down? Like a lot of looking down maybe in the shower while you're sitting down. Is it measuring or grabbing or touching? Is it comparing to other people? Is it looking at photos? And then just picking one and starting with an intervention point with one of them, which is if you notice it's one mirror in your house you tend to go to, cover it. You don't even have to cover the whole thing. Just cover like the part of the mirror where you can see the part of your body that you tend to focus on. And as we touched on in the last episode, it's temporary. We are teaching temporary avoidance to cut off a compulsive behavior so that when we can more confidently reintroduce those things, you're making a choice now. If the compulsion is gone, and so when you go into that room, you know that this is how you operate now or have a tendency to want to operate. And so then you get to say, okay, how am I going to choose to interact with this reflection rather than going, oh my God, I body checked again and I didn't even realize until I'd done it. It's things like when you get dressed, when you go into a change room, to turn away from the mirror, put the clothes on, and first check how do they feel against your body. Like I'm wearing a cotton on dress today that's pure cotton. It feels great. Doesn't feel constrictive. Doesn't feel like a sensory ick against my body. Like when you wear like just a really scratchy wool or something, and it just makes you feel so aware of your body. So first doing like a sensory check-in, and then only if it passes the comfortability test that you would be happy to spend your day in this outfit. It's not going to bring a lot of sensory awareness to your body. Then give yourself 3 seconds in the mirror. 3, 2, 1. That's all the data you need. And then walk out. Same
Mm.
thing in the change room. Don't put these clothes on in a change room with terrible lighting that is made that way to make you feel terrible. So you'll buy something and get your serotonin back up. Turn around, try it on. First, check how it feels, how you feel as a human being in that outfit. And then only if it passes that test, turn around 3 seconds, grab the outfit or put it on. Just
Mm.
these little things that we can do to, again, just break that compulsive behavior.
Yeah.
Are there any that we worked on that you
Oh
found
yeah.
helpful or that your clients find particularly helpful that
Oh
you've
yeah.
to them?
I feel like in my own experience, like doing the body checking log was the most disgustingly humbling thing I've ever done in my life.
It's so confronting.
So confronting. I'd be
Mm.
like, oh my God, this is on 3 pages. I'm like, making it like, okay, with size 7 font. Um,
Yes.
because it was so eye-opening. Because I think the thing with body checking, it is this insidious habit. But
Mhm.
like any habit, it's learnt behavior, which also means it can be unlearned behavior. And that's just the nature of it, right? So it really is going to take this high level of awareness to firstly even acknowledge that it's happening.
Yes.
So I feel like just the awareness piece was actually enough for me to be like, oh, okay, I know where I can like make some little incisions here or here. And then also just realizing the amount of times, like I was using an analogy, it's like you don't need to pick the scab. Like you don't need to make it worse, but it can like feel really tempting, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I feel like that is what I would always do. I'd be like, oh, I feel really uncomfortable. I'm going to subconsciously sabotage myself and make myself more uncomfortable by confirming with a reflective surface,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
So it was really interesting just realizing that, being like, oh, I'm kind of my own worst enemy here. Like I definitely want to recover from this thing, but it's really useful to like pull out all like the nuanced behavior of being like, oh, interesting. The eating disorder is actually operating in so many more ways than I thought it was, as opposed to like, I think when I came into recovery, I was just like so green and naive. And it was oh, like there's these behaviors that are like, yeah, they're kind of like screwed up. Like I probably need to like work on them. I had no idea about any of this other stuff. I had no idea about the importance of like cognitive challenging, and I had like was like addicted to dopamine and all these other aspects. It's interesting you said that before about like just like the buying thing and like the serotonin, because I think
Mm.
my form of avoidance, because I would like hate trying things on in like changing rooms, would
Mm.
be like I'm like, oh, it'll make me uncomfortable even trying it on. I'm just gonna buy it. And then it like wouldn't fit well at home. And I'd be like, so now I feel shit when I try it on at home and I'm down $50.
Yeah.
Like it's just this like wanting this instant gratification, wanting to feel okay now, but like not thinking about any of the consequences. So I think
Yes.
that is why like body checking is about so much more than just trying to make these little adjustments so that we can reduce the distress, which is what it's about. But it's also about understanding how you're operating and why you're operating in that way. Um,
Completely.
yeah, I think, and particularly with the scales, right? I
Mm.
think to get off the scales, it's going to be different for everyone. I think a lot of people might know that they're not a slow reduction kind of human, right? And actually, maybe like a cold turkey approach would be more appropriate. But I do think it's important to find kind of a middle ground, something that is going to be obviously challenging, but isn't going to overload the individual's nervous system. Because I think so
Completely.
often people can be like, cool, no, I'll just like totally like get rid of them. And then they like have a little bit of like temptation and they're back onto it and they feel like they're failed. But I
Yes.
also understand that reduction can be really tricky for some personality types as well,
Yeah.
right? So I think even like a middle ground there would be, like maybe only being weighed by in a practitioner appointment, and maybe it's a blind weigh. Like any urge, which both body checking and the urge to get on the scales are, there needs to be this awareness and an attempt to understand and process the actual feeling that is coming with the urge, right? Without the behavioral engagement. So actually just working with the urge itself is really, really useful. For someone that might look like, healthy distraction, or for someone that might look like dialoguing or like really trying to seek the rational information. Because I think it can be really easy to feel the urge and then want to like try to do something differently, but without actually getting an understanding of like, why is the urge there?
The way that I like to break it down for people is awareness, intervention, redirection.
Yeah.
You know, I love an acronym, and this one actually spells something air.
Oh, it does too.
It's a breath of fresh air. Which is, I think that body checking or getting off the scales is a good example of awareness, intervention, redirection, which
Mm,
is you do the log, as you said, very often clients just doing the log, the awareness, they will swear to me that they don't either body check at all or a lot. And I'm like, okay, let's see what comes through and we'll talk about it next week. And it's always more than they think it is, or they do it and they didn't realize before that they actually do this.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. So that's the awareness piece. And very often, even in that first week when they come back to me, they're like, Mia, I found myself stopping myself. I found myself like
Yeah.
getting into the elevator and turning my back to the mirror where I would usually stare. Or if I was, in the bathroom, I really kept my eyes on my hands and then like walked out the door faster than I would have. Like I've been much more efficient at work because I'm not body
Yeah.
checking in the work bathroom. So the awareness is sometimes enough. The intervention are then the temporary things we're talking about, like how you get dressed or covering mirrors, or if there's photos that you know are triggering, putting them away from where they're more accessible, like on your phone, and putting them in a
Mm.
folder within a folder within a folder in an external hard drive or, flash drive or whatever. But God, retro, I don't even know what they're called anymore. People are going to be like,
Oh, no, so
what
that
is
is,
that?
to be honest, I don't really know what it is.
Put it on a floppy disk. That's really aging me. And put it somewhere where you can't access it temporarily. We don't need to delete all our memories. We don't need to, smash all the mirrors in the world. That's not practical. But if we can just temporarily intervene and make that not accessible, what will then happen is your eating disorder will tell you why you're doing it because now it doesn't have the thing it wants. In the absence of the thing it wants, it talks. When you
Yeah.
give it the thing it doesn't want, it talks. If I could break recovery down into a simple formula, which you can't, but this is one way to. Here's how to figure out how to recover. Find out what your eating disorder doesn't want and give it that. Find out what it does want and take that away. Because in the gap is where the tension is, and that's where it talks and tells you this is why you need this to cope, to belong, to be worthy, to feel comfortable, whatever it is. Then the redirection is exactly what you're saying: distress tolerance, distraction, becoming more adept at sitting with those feelings, or sending your coach an email and going, oh my gosh, my eating disorder self is furious with me today. And I need, some backup, and I need to dialogue this. And I just need you to re anchor me to healthy self. And then, just like with everything we do with the food and the movement, the body image stuff is the same in that regard, in the sense that we do these things on repeat, and that's where we rewire, right? It's just
Mm.
the opposite, where usually we're giving eating disorder something it doesn't want. It's just the reverse, but still kind of the same process where it's just like finding the
Yeah.
formula that works for you and then repeat, 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 repeat.
Yeah. 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 It's like I think people when they think about body checking, they're like, oh, this is something that is causing so much distress for my body image. But like listen to everything we're saying. It's actually so much more than that. I actually think addressing this is a really, really powerful tool because, even like distressing body image is one of also like the main contributors to people developing an eating disorder. So to be told that you're not going to be able to work on it during the recovery of the eating disorder, it's not really adding up.
Not loving it. I don't love it. And it's why I started, like, body neutrality was one of the
Yeah.
first workshops I did, because I was, again, just coming from my lived experience and the training, where I was like, well, there's practical skills for all of this stuff. Like, let's start
Yeah.
building something, right?
Yeah.
And there are great practitioners out there who are, really taking that body
Yeah.
neutrality philosophy,
Totally.
combining it with some practical skills, which is great. Always, always good to see more and more of that. And with the weighing thing, I completely agree with you. It's interesting. I always give clients that option where I'm like, this is an experiment. Let's take the scales
Yeah.
away. Again, awareness, intervention, redirection for a period of time. You can go and get them after the month-long experiment or whatever. And we can either do it slowly or we can do it cold turkey. And I always say, look, I promise you cold turkey is going to be easier, but you tell me what you want to do and we'll do it. And even the ones who choose incremental reduction eventually come to me and they're like, me, I think I just want to get off them
Yeah.
because now I just don't want to know. And like, I actually have
Yeah.
evidence now. And that's all we're doing is taking the number away for long enough for you to learn that you don't need that number to tell you how your day is going to be, how you're going to
Mm.
feel about yourself, how other people are going to feel about you. You, in the absence of that number, get to actually get the real evidence of how your day goes and how people
Yeah.
interact with you without that number telling you and creating like a filter through which you're experiencing
Oh,
the world,
absolutely.
right? And
Yeah.
then when I say to them, well, months up, what do you want to do? They're like, I'm not putting them back in my bedroom or the bathroom. Are you kidding me? Like, I'm like, great, it's scale
Oh,
smashing time. Send me a photo.
totally. I never smashed the scales. I
Mine
always
weren't smashable, sadly. I was like, God damn, why did I have to buy the old metal sad ones?
I'd probably just buy some to smash, I would say. Or I'll
Yeah.
smash someone else's. I haven't, if anyone wants to send me their scales, I'll smash them. Um, okay, so the next question that we had sent in was, what are some approaches that you encourage people to do to improve their relationship with their body? I mean,
This one's a you.
love this
This
question.
is a you question.
Everyone. So if anyone's interested in learning about embodiment, you can come to one of our upcoming retreats, but I will
Yeah.
also tell you a little bit about it now. So something that I'm super passionate about in recovery and just generally in life during and post recovery is this whole idea of embodiment. So I think when people hear this term, they're often like, I don't know what that is. It's super woo-woo. Holly, what are you talking about? It's kind of hard to like understand and also really hard to put into practice. But recovery is this really, really cool experience that means that you are not only improving your relationship with your body, but it's also you improving your relationship to yourself. And I see embodiment as being an ultimate piece of this, right? And the approach, I mean, I guess the goal with embodiment is ultimately to be able to see the body as a home and as a resource, right? So to really understand and achieve this, it is a collection of mindset shifts and reframing and connecting with a felt sense of your body, not only the intellectual narratives around it. And then this is then practiced through something that we call positive embodiment. So the correlation, just to sort of start, the correlation between embodiment and eating disorders is that anyone who has an eating disorder, like it in its essence, is an experience of disembodiment,
Yeah.
right? Which is ultimately a disconnection between mind and body, meaning the antidote to that is something we call positive embodiment, right? So this work is absolutely an extension of the body neutrality work. Whilst also practicing embodiment, you continue to use the cognitive and behavioral tools that you've been working on for symptom management, but whilst now also honoring the body as this tool and a resource for experiencing, coping, decision making, as well as just generally finding meaning and purpose.
Mm.
And I think people hear this and they're like, yeah, but like, I don't know what you mean. And I think the first thing to realize here is that when you are looking at the body through the eating disorder lens, the body is seen as this like huge problem, right?
Mm.
It's seen as this thing that's like disposable and it's this thing that just actually needs to be controlled. But to heal your relationship with your body, you need to look at it as if it was like it's a person, right? And I'm going to make the assumption that no one listening to this is going to be speaking to another human being in the way in which they would speak and act towards their body, right? And I think for some people, that realization is can actually be really, really sad. Just like that level of like casual cruelness that you have towards yourself and this like forever home that we have.
Yeah.
So then in recovery, you're joining the team of the body, right? You and the body, we're on the same team. Therefore, the body cannot be the enemy. Otherwise, like you would lose the game. I mean, life's not a game, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And when you and your body are on the same team, you have to learn to work together, not against each other, right? But this is really tricky because when you have an eating disorder, anything that the body has tried to communicate with you, it's been totally discounted because the eating disorder has seen it as a threat.
It's not priority, right? Where it's
Yeah.
like if you're objectifying the body, then the messages they send is like, well, if it doesn't meet that priority of like the body has to fit this mold, then
Yeah.
the eating disorder is going to go, nah, not listening to that, not honoring that because
Yeah.
we prioritize controlling the body so much more.
Well, exactly. And I think that control is what's really interesting there because the control, it's a product of the mind.
Mm.
So when I was in my own eating disorder, this is how disembodiment, as to give you an example, this is how disembodiment played out for me. So I was completely disconnected from my body, totally living in my mind and just only using mental functions to give me a sense of perceived safety, right? So I felt safer in adding, subtracting, measuring, assessing, controlling, judging, right? All these things that are functions of thought. So my super disordered relationship with my body meant that I was able to bypass my somatic experience of memory and emotions and all this stuff by trying to intellectualize everything, right? My eating disorder, and this is what eating disorders do. This is their thing. They attempt to bring logic and reasoning to like sensing and feeling and remembering body, right? So
Yeah.
I was only living from my mind, but your mind is not only who you are. So living only from that place is not a true expression of who I am on this earth, right?
Yeah.
So creating space to feel the depths of my emotional world was critical. And it wasn't possible for me to do that until I really shifted my attention towards the body and learnt to stay present with it. I think so this really speaks to the whole idea of seeing the body as more than just this physical being, right? It's emotional, it's psychological, it's spiritual, it's all these aspects. But I think there's this illusion perpetuated by insight orientated therapies, right? That all we need to do is like think differently and understand more. And
Yeah.
yes, we do need to do that. Of course, it's required to understand your eating disorder experience. But I just think when over understanding occurs as this like attempt, and this is also like overthinking, right? Anyone who's like an overthinker, this is for you, right? When over understanding occurs as an attempt to avoid experiences of feeling and memory, that's a problem, right? When there's nothing more to understand and there's everything to be felt, over understanding is a way to avoid emotional experience. And, I feel like there's such a, which I love, there's such sort of like a push in like the wellness world, in like the psychological world, and like that neuroscience really agrees with this, that like
Yes.
memory and feeling must be felt and experienced to be processed and integrated to move us towards well-being. So, in short, I guess my sorry, everyone,
It's gorgeous. I love it.
I don't know what in short means. I just throw that in there.
Neither of us do.
In short, my approach to creating a healthy relationship with your body, it goes so much deeper than how you just feel about your appearance, right? And I think this work can really give a foundation on which you can respond to life differently with more depth and kindness and introspection. And I think when do this embodiment work, you really understand these layers of what does it actually mean to be introspective. When you have that awareness, when you're able to understand your feelings and physical sensation without the mental narratives, it gives you this understanding of like, this is this lived, felt expression of who I am. And then from there, you can start to practice that. And these include things like intentional mindfulness or getting into flow or creating joy, like creativity, all these
Connecting
things.
to nature.
Totally. They're all
Yeah.
expressions of embodiment that help you understand your body is so much more than trying to be a small size fitting into a skirt that hasn't fit you for 3 years. Like it's
Yeah.
just so much more than that. So I don't remember what the question was, but that's a mini one.
I Anyone who comes to the retreats knows how much I love hearing Whole talk about embodiment. It's like I found like the second half to some of my life's work in like what I know is so core. Like I think this is really going to be a key part of like your life's work is this embodiment stuff because you do it
Mhm.
so in your very own way. You know what I mean? Like I don't hear people talk about it and they don't present it the way you do. Where my work is so much about like getting the distress
Mm.
down and like getting reconnected to the body in a way that is, yeah, hearing the body's signals as a message. And then I feel like that's where your stuff picks up and is talking about the same thing, like the body as a
Yeah.
messenger and how it expresses itself. And then all of these much deeper expressions of how
Mm.
the body is a deeper manifestation of who we are and what we're experiencing and how
Mm.
we can move through the world. Because when I was in Bali this last time, I read this fantastic book by, I'm going to butcher his name because I'm Australian, please forgive me, Gabor Mate. He's everywhere, which it really speaks to what you were talking about, which is this intersection in sort of the psychology world and
Yeah.
that kind of more physical well-being sort of world
Yeah.
where we're starting to see this absolute connection of how anxiety expresses itself, how trauma expresses itself. I mean, when the
Yeah.
Body Keeps the Score by
Yeah.
Bessel van der Kolk is obviously another example, but this book by Gabor Mate is fantastic. As somebody who has two chronic illnesses, I was just reading through it like, yep, 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 yep. And something that I think that people with eating disorders will resonate with was he was talking about like being the chronic yes person, like the chronically ill are
Mm.
the chronic yes people, where it's like, what do you need? And, offering what's needed before checking in with yourself and checking in with what is your body telling you about what your limits are and what you need and how you need to kind of put the oxygen mask on you before you do others. And it was, yeah, just so interesting because I was like, I've obviously learned so much from you about all of this. And you were a great stepping stone for me because, as you know, these are things I'm very practically minded, where it's why
Mm.
you always make me cry in your workshop because I'm like, this is something that, just speaks to me that I wouldn't have naturally explored. Do you know what I mean?
Totally. I think this is why we're really good because I'm really up here and floaty, and then you like ground it. You're like, okay, and then this is the practice.
And then you get me out of
Yeah, yeah.
my dark well of practicality and as we were talking about, sometimes frustration and anxiety. And yeah, you just like add color and layers to a process that is really, really hard. And then, as we always say, if you're going to do this hard work,
Hmm.
let's make it really worthwhile. And I think that the way that you talk about what is possible, what could be possible. We can't make any guarantees for anyone's individual process, right? But
Oh,
we just want
yeah,
to put things on the table for people and be like, explore it if you want to. It could be
totally.
better.
I've just figured it out. I feel like we're both very much like thinking, but then you have this like strong pull towards doing, and I have this strong pull towards feeling. And together
Yes.
it's like a triangle. I think we should write a book about this.
And then we meet in the middle with our sentimental sap fest.
Totally. Yeah, it's honestly just such special work. And I think for me, the embodiment piece is really like it's the meaning and purpose piece. It's like I distinctly remember the day I was sitting out in my mum's backyard and I was reading, I remember what I was reading. I was reading like some recovery book, and I realized that my like spiritual understanding of who I am in the world and my recovery, they're the same thing. They're
Yeah.
literally the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's when it all started making so much sense. There was just so much more meaning to the things that I was doing, and I was understanding why it was so important to learn to stay with my experience that is physical, emotional, psychological, as opposed to being like easy button, instant gratification, maladaptive behavior,
Yeah.
because that's not life. There's not supposed to be any easy buttons, and every eating disorder behavior, every body check, every stepping on the scales in that moment, on some level, it is a form of self-abandonment. Like you're saying, like, I can't be with this emotional experience right now, and I need to transport myself away from the pain. But if you do that, you don't get the lessons.
Yes. And you don't get the resilience, and then you don't get the like true sense of being able to just sit and be with yourself,
Totally.
whether it's in the dark day or it's in the wonderful bright day that you never could have imagined was coming. And it's so interesting that you say that you remember that moment, because I remember the moment. I was living in Croydon at the time. I think I was like 27, I think. So I would have been in recovery for a couple of years, where I was walking around, like just going for an afternoon walk. And I was like, I all I hear about is either like hating your body and diet culture stuff, or
Mm.
sort of like what I thought was body positivity at the time. I didn't realize body positivity was more of a political movement, which is what we now more know as like body acceptance and body celebration, which is all wonderful and fabulous. And I've certainly had experiences with that too. But for the bulk of my recovery, I just didn't feel like I resonated. I was like, I don't want to hate my body anymore, but I just don't want to pay that much attention to it that I have to be like
Mm.
reading my thighs poetry every morning, because I've spent so much time thinking about my body. My goal is to just not have to think about it that much, which is that whole core tenet of body neutrality, which is take the pie chart of what you want to focus on and how you want to, define your worth, and take the body right out of it, as opposed to it being a, predominant or enormous part of the pie chart. But yeah, really interesting, because that was, I don't remember a lot of really specific moments, but that one where I was like, I just want to sit somewhere in the middle and I just want to be fairly indifferent throughout the recovery process.
Mm.
But then what you're speaking to is that more expansive, which I think suits where our guests are when they come to the retreat.
Yeah.
Suits
Yep.
that timing perfectly, that they're at that
Yeah.
stage where it's like all these things actually make sense at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next question we have is, how do I cope with feeling like I have no concept of what I actually look like?
I love this question, because this is a conversation I eventually end up having with clients when they're talking about like, but Mia, how do I know what I look like? Not just in reference to like their perception of themselves, but like other people as well, which I think is so much of what we do. When, I don't know if you ever did this, but I would try to imagine what other people thought I looked like, and like try to get cues from them about what they
Oh,
thought like they look
okay.
what they thought I looked like very odd data collection that wasn't data, because you have to do a lot of mind reading and making stuff up. But what I try to explain to people is that this is a very frustrating answer, because it is both comforting to your healthy self and really, really distressing to your eating disorder self, which is you're never really going to know what you look like.
Mm, mm.
You're a human being with biases, with beliefs, with experiences. You have a subjective view of everything. And this is not just bodies. This is not just you. If I were to ask 10 people what their favorite landscape is to look at, is it a mountain? Is it a
Yeah.
valley? Is it the ocean? Is it sand dunes? Everyone's going to give a different answer. So does that mean that the mountain is ugly if somebody doesn't pick it? Or, you know what I mean? Like, it's
Mm.
there's what everyone looks like, obviously, but then there's the filter that we all have that you can't remove. You can't be a robot. You're going to have a subjective filter that you look at other people through. That's very much what attraction is, which is way more complex than eating disorders think
Yes.
attraction is. People think that it's just this one body that everyone's attracted to, which is just not
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
But also how you're going to see yourself. Like you'd never. And so is it to try to see yourself absolutely accurately, impossible, or is it to learn to not care that much?
Yes, I love what you're saying here. I would also say that if someone's feeling this way and they're kind of just feeling like they just don't know what the answer is and they're seeking an answer, I think it's a really good opportunity to refocus on how you feel as opposed to how you look being this grounding understanding of self.
Yeah.
Because think about it's like it's kind of similar. Like so many people are colorblind. I feel like everyone who struggles with food often like also body blind.
Yeah.
And it's so subjective, like you're saying, it's so subjective. I think when I was like going through recovery, and maybe when I was also young, I was a little bit more passive to things that I thought were beautiful, right? And
Mm.
I would actually just go with like the conventional, like, that's what's trendy, that's what's beautiful, that's what's
Yeah.
socially accepted, as opposed to being like, now I think I'm like pretty cutthroat with things I like and dislike. If someone's like, oh, do you like that? I'm like, hell no, absolutely not. Or like, you're getting no chance. Or I'm like, I adore that.
Mm.
Like stop people on the street. It's very much like, I have a lot more of an understanding of things that I find are beautiful and like what my taste is and what my like palette is and all these things, as opposed to just feeling like I need an answer that's going to come from like influence of things that are like socially acceptable, like bodies,
Mm.
And I also think going through this whole journey and like working in this world, I think both of our understanding of like beauty and bodies is so expansive, right? And I
Mm.
think if to be able to help people understand that their idea of their appearance is so much, again, it's so much more than physical. So I think if someone's really struggling with the concept, but they don't really know how they look, it's like, well, what are some of the like non-physical characteristics you do really like about yourself? Because we are so much who we are in the world is like we're who we're presenting as. I remember I was like talking to a client not long ago who is like going through a bit of a hard time, was going through a hard time, and people would kind of be like, oh, like, are you okay?
Mm.
And I think it's really easy in that situation to think that they're judging you based on your appearance. And like,
Yes.
if you're usually this bubbly, bright, like outgoing, like big personality person, and you kind of become a little bit of a shell of yourself, well, yeah, like that's what they're judging it on. It's not your appearance. I think there's just such the appearance is just held in such high esteem. And realistically, appearance is not what is beautiful. So I think it's like, I mean, this is not the question. We've gone on a massive tangent here. But I think it's really useful to realize that how you feel about yourself does not have to be like appearance related at all. And this is an opportunity to actually put a little bit more effort into being like, what does make me feel good? What do I like about myself?
Yeah. And I think this links back to the like body checking and weighing question, because if a client is having a really bad week with body image, I always ask the same few questions, which is, did you weigh yourself recently?
Yeah.
Has your body checking gone up? And if they're not sure, then we do a log. Did you try on clothes that are triggering clothes? Like this can also be like when people start to get really foggy about what they look like I just feel like I have no sense of what I look like. It usually means they're doing some of those compulsive behaviors, which, as I
Yeah.
said in the last episode, that metaphor of the more you body check, you're trying to see what the whole forest looks like. The more you body
Yeah.
check, the closer you get to being nose to tree trunk, and then you have no idea. And so, of course, then you're confused because you're like, but I can see myself. I'm looking at myself in the mirror. And it's like, that's the nature of these
Yes.
behaviors, is that
Yes.
you lose. And I think people experience this even outside of the disordered eating experience or body distress or body dysmorphia. Like when you go to the hairdresser,
Oh,
like I know I have a good sense of what I look like now because I don't body check, and like, I don't have that sense anymore of like, oh my God, what do I look like? Which just goes to show that this can change. But when I go to the hairdresser, if I'm sitting there for 3 hours and I'm in my direct line of sight, I'm like, I feel like I just look like an A4 piece of paper with two holes punched in it. Like I have no sense of what I look like. I feel like my whole face is featureless because that's what it does, even to a brain that isn't skewed in that moment that way. Like I heard Miranda Hart in her book talk about it. She, exact same example, the hairdresser. I've heard a lot of other people who I know talk about it. And I'm like, oh, isn't that interesting? That's a very human experience. And then eating disorders just grab it and run with it.
Totally. And I think it also just gets extra layers of confusing there. If like someone steps on the scale and like the scale isn't what they then think the representation is. And they're like, oh, but it doesn't make sense. And I'm so confused. It's like we need to stop looking at numerical things to give you a sense of like understanding, worth, value, right? Like they just have such high importance because again, number on scale literally means nothing. Like it's like there's so many variables to
Yeah.
that it's insane.
I think that, if I could pick like the one thing that I see when a client is really derailed, they've got on the scales because they
Yeah,
look at that number and they're like, but Mia, the number's the number. You can't argue with that. I'm like, I can't. The number is the number. The number is how your body is interacting with gravity. That's it. The feelings that you're having about the number are not factual. And that's what the eating disorder does, is that it
yeah,
grabs the feelings that it causes and it attaches it to the number and goes, that's factual. That's evidence. No, the number is the number. The things you're telling yourself about yourself and how you feel about it, that's
absolutely.
subjective. It's not an objective number. It's not
Yes.
data. It is,
Yes.
but it's not objective data.
Oh my God, absolutely. Which I think leads us to our last question, which is how to not let bloating trigger behaviors due to poor body image. So I think this ties in really, really well because what we're kind of talking about here, this conversation, is that this is about like a physical discomfort that has become psychological discomfort because of your attachment to it. So the work here, like you're saying, it's to be able to experience the physical experience of bloating without the psychological attachment that like this is bad or I
Yeah.
can't handle this or I need to fix this or this equates to weight gain because discomfort absolutely is unpleasant, right? When it's labeled as that. Your reaction to the physical experience, that's actually what causes the stress as opposed to the bloating itself. The bloating is not the problem. Your attitudes towards the bloating, that's the problem, right? It's not as if you stub your toe and it causes poor body image, right? For that day.
Mm.
But if you had a particular psychological attachment to stubbing your toe, like maybe it would, right? So
Yes.
the work here is to shift the response from the like trigger being bloating in this example to that actually just being this like physical somatic experience of being neutral or tolerable, right? So that your nervous system doesn't get too overwhelmed that it feels like I need to engage in what it perceives as like the solution, right? Which would be like say like I feel bloated, I need to restrict or I need to exercise or like do any of these things. You know that quote, which is just kind of ties into that. It's like Viktor Frankl says, like the space between the stimulus and the response that
Mm-hmm.
lies your power to choose. And so that in this example, like that's like you've been triggered before you react. What
Mm.
can we put into that space? So I think when something triggers you, that's the stimulus. So bloating in this example, it gives you instantly attach like a feeling tone to it. And that is either going to be like neutral, pleasant, or unpleasant, right? And then comes the choice like, are you going to attach to it, which this example is attaching to it, or are you going to avoid it, or are you going to allow it, right? So if the trigger is leading you to neg body image, that choice there is to attach, right? We want to get to the trigger of bloating, get it from like this unpleasant feeling tone to it just being neutral. And what that looks like is having the trigger and then not engaging in the behavior. Because the less that you're attaching to something, ultimately that trigger is going to become like more neutral, more neutral, more neutral.
Yes, yes, it's that, that space that you're referring to in that great quote is, I think that's what we're doing as coaches, is we're just
Yeah.
putting some space between people and their eating disorder thoughts, their eating disorder urges, their eating disorder compulsions, their eating disorder behaviors. And that's where they get a choice back. Like I think sometimes we've talked about people coming into coaching thinking we're going to make them
Yeah.
or we're going to do it for them. And it's like, all we're doing is giving you a choice back. We're giving you tools and skills and mindset shifts, which give you the space to then look at all the information and then make a decision versus making a decision under the coercion of extreme anxiety and intimidation and
Yeah.
threats, which is what your eating disorder does. That's not you making a choice. That's you operating under coercion.
Mm.
And I think the, physical experience that this person's talking about bloating is a great example. Because over the years, I've had this question about bloating for 11 years. And when I first would get it, I'd be like, I don't know. I don't know. But the idea that like bloating that you're experiencing during recovery, like people will be like, Mia, how do I get the bloating to stop in recovery? Or you know, how do I stop it from bothering me? It's like, well, for a period of time, it's going to, because
Mm.
as you say, like it's getting used to this
Yeah.
discomfort, which your eating disorder interprets as this terrible thing. It's just your body doing its thing, right? You're going to be bloated for the rest of your life for a variety of reasons. And it's kind of goes back to that embodiment thing. Like it's demonized this very natural
Yep.
messaging system that you need to work in tandem with and go, okay, bit of forgiveness and compassion and understanding for my body that it needs to experience this physical process right now to do whatever it needs to do. And you know what? I don't need to micromanage that. I don't. It's like it's a different department in a business. It's like, okay, I know that my body's got that covered. So when it's bloating, it got something, that it needs to deal with. Yes, of course, if we're dealing with extremely painful or even like to whatever degree painful or uncomfortable bloating, please go and get medical advice. Please go and speak to somebody if you're noticing that it is frequent, painful, uncomfortable, obviously. But in terms of just average bloating experiences that we have during recovery or as a human being, we don't need to cure it. It's just an expression the body needs to have to take care of you. And not to let yourself, as you say, like have this attachment to it that eating disorder wants to have. The healthy self-attachment to it is, yeah, my body knows what it's doing. Just let it do its thing. Just leave it alone. Because the irony with recovery and eating disorders is always, if you try to do something to remedy that bloating, it's probably going to make it worse. Like whatever the initial thing is that eating disorder doesn't like, the way that it tries to manage that or cope with that, like, well, this is
Totally.
triggering my bad body image, so now I'm going to do XYZ to fix it. You're just kicking the can of pain down the road.
We're
And it's
picking
going
it.
to be a bigger can by the time you get there.
The can is going to grow.
Yeah. In
We're going.
this world,
Cans do grow.
cans are human and they grow.
And on that note,
My best metaphor to date.
I think, these questions are all so, so, so useful, but they actually like have this very common thread, right? It's that ultimately your relationship with your body can be really expansive dependent on the lens in which you're looking at it through.
Mhm. Yeah, and the realization and the reality that, as we've talked about, you are not going to get to the end of the road with your relationship with your body until you have lived a full and wonderful and happy life, which is what we hope for absolutely everybody. But whilst you are inhabiting a human body, you are in relationship with it. And it's kind of like, I think people, once they recover, are surprised that they're still human and they still have anxiety and they still have their vulnerabilities and they still have their idiosyncrasies. And none of this is to cure all the complexities of being a person. And having a body is really weird at times and strange. And especially in the world that we live in, even more so, depending on what we're interacting with and what we're looking at and what we're being influenced by. There is an opportunity here to have a relationship with food, body, insert whatever that is here, that the average person will never get to experience because they never have to do this work. So yes, lucky them in that regard. But this is why we always say, if you're going to do this work, get as much out of it as you can.
Mm.
Don't stop maybe when you're tempted to stop, because you might be just before that door that you can open and go, oh, this is where all the sun is streaming in.
Totally. Honestly, it just gets better. Like it doesn't
Yeah.
get worse. Like it actually just gets, I mean, look, it gets a little bit hard at the beginning, but once you get over
Ebbs and flows.
yeah, it ebbs and flows, but ultimately like, the ebbs and flows are in this uphill trajectory.
Totally. Yeah.
Yes.
Beautifully, beautifully put. So we will see when we see you next, because we have the retreat next week, and obviously we're on a fortnightly schedule, so no promises. We will be back, especially as we head towards the end of the year. I'm sure we'll have some things to say about that period. I'll have to brush up on what the hell we said last time. But always so lovely to see your face. Always so lovely to see the people.
I love seeing your face, talking to the people. This is great. Also, if no one noticed, me and Mia did decide to do this podcast 10 minutes before we did it. So hope you enjoyed it.
Hope that you all got a ton out of it. Or as always, let us know. We love your emails. We love your messages. We love your comments. We want to hear from the people all the time.